I sent the divorce letter to the hotel room where my wife was with her lover, and she was shocked and cried a lot. I knew this not from her tears, but from the silence that came after. That cold stillness that only the end of a farce could bring. There was something almost poetic in the way that envelope, simple and white, collapsed everything she had hidden, everything she thought I would never know. And knowing was the worst part. Knowing and not being able to stop imagining the scenes, the hands that weren't mine touching her skin, the whispers that weren't meant for my ears. Every detail burned inside me, and the decision to send that letter was the only way to rid myself of the ashes. The plan was simple, direct and surgical. I knew where she was, I knew who she was with. And, most importantly, I knew exactly how to make sure the whole world knew too. When the receptionist delivered the letter to their room, it wasn't just a piece of paper asking for the marriage to end. It was an alarm. A siren that announced the fall of a carefully orchestrated farce. She thought it would be discreet, that I would never find out, that the escapades could be hidden in the gaps in my work schedule and business trips. But what she didn't know was that, in silence, I was constructing my own narrative. A story of betrayal that would soon not be mine alone to bear. Why did you do that, she would have asked, if she had had the courage to face me after reading the words I carefully typed in that letter. How could you do this to me, she might say. But the truth is, throughout all that chaos, the only question that echoed in my mind was, how could she do this to me? The answer didn't come. Her silence was louder than any justification. She cried, but her tears never meant anything, at least not anymore. Because, in the end, what was revealed in that hotel room wasn't just a betrayal, it was a torn contract, a broken promise, a shattered home in a single envelope. The watch on my wrist seemed to slow down as I watched the notification count rise on my phone. I had made a point of registering my silence in a way that she could never ignore. The letter was the first part, the second, I made a point of publishing. A photo of the envelope, with the simple and direct title, "To Room 1402. For my wife and her companion." And suddenly, my profile, which until then was a mere extension of my ordinary life, became a time bomb. Every reaction, every comment became a little spark, and I watched as the explosion spread. Little by little, the messages began to arrive. Friends, acquaintances, strangers. "Is this serious?" some asked. Others seemed more interested in gossiping than consoling, as if everything were a soap opera drama. But I wasn't interested in their opinion. My focus was her. I wanted every message, every alert on her phone to be a reminder of the charade she tried to keep up. I wanted her lover to see it too, to know there was no escaping the consequences. It wasn't just about the divorce, it was about exposing the lie, forcing the truth out of the shadows where it had hidden for so long. I knew I was playing a dangerous game, risking everything in one bold move, but there was no other way. I needed her to feel the same helplessness I felt, the same humiliation. If she could spend nights in my place, then let everyone know. If he could whisper words that were meant to be mine alone, then let him face the trial with her. The last message I posted that night said, "They say the worst thing about love is betrayal. But the worst thing about betrayal is pretending it never happened. I'm tired of pretending." And there, I knew, there was no turning back. The truth spread like wildfire, burning everything in its path. She was no longer the perfect wife. He was no longer the unknown guy in the shadows. They were the protagonists of a story that I had just rewritten, a story that I didn't want to tell, but that I needed to free myself. I imagined their hands shaking as they tried to understand what this meant, as every gaze, every pointed finger, turned toward them. But what I didn't expect was what would happen next. How that simple and direct act of revenge would bring to light even deeper truths, secrets that I didn't even know were hidden. And now, as the chaos continues to unfold, as they desperately try to put out the fire I lit, there's only one question that still lingers in my mind: how many lies are still behind that betrayal? What haven't they told me yet? Welcome to our channel. Here, we do not tolerate betrayal. The stories you will hear are fictional, but the message is real. Betrayal can destroy lives, families, and leave deep scars. Each story is a reminder of how one wrong choice can ruin everything. So, get ready. You are about to hear a shocking story, full of twists, revelations, and intense emotions. We hope you have a good story and, more than anything, that you never forget the impact of betrayal. James was sitting in the small office of his home, surrounded by stacks of papers and the soft light of the lamp illuminating only half of his face. It was a night like so many others. He was immersed in work, while the rest of the house remained silent. Since opening his own law firm, the nights have become longer and the weekends shorter. He was always proud of being a meticulous man, who solved problems with precision and calm, qualities that also reflected in his personal life. Or, at least, that's how he imagined it. Amanda, his wife, was a woman with a striking presence, the type who made people turn to look when she entered a room. With her long brown hair and a charming smile, she had the gift of transforming tense situations into light, grace-filled moments. She was a teacher at a high school, a profession she always considered her calling. He liked to feel useful, to guide and inspire his students, and he used to bring home fun and exciting stories from his everyday life. Amanda was the kind of person who lit up wherever she was, and that was exactly why James fell in love with her. Their marriage had started out like a fairy tale. They met at university, where James was studying law and Amanda was studying pedagogy. From the first meeting, it was as if they were made for each other. He listened to her talk passionately about her plans for the future, and she admired his quiet determination. They built a comfortable life together, full of small routines that in the eyes of others might seem banal, but for them were the foundations of a solid love. The coffee she prepared every morning before he left for work, the quick messages during the day just to say, "I miss you," the dinners on Friday where they always chose the same restaurant, just to maintain a tradition. It was a quiet, predictable life, and for a long time, that was enough for both of them. But, like all long-lasting love stories, challenges arise. James was increasingly busy at the office, and his cases seemed to multiply. He had ambitions to expand the business, perhaps even open a second branch in another city, and that required dedication. Amanda, in turn, was feeling increasingly distant from him. She noticed the way he delved into the processes, the paperwork, and noticed the absence of the laughter and deep conversations they used to share. As time passed, their nights together began to become silent, each trapped in their own thoughts and worries. There was a kind of discomfort floating between them, a silent tension that neither of them seemed to want to face. Amanda began spending more time outside of the house, accepting invitations to hang out with coworkers, attending school events, and eventually meeting old friends. She told herself that this was a way to fill the void in her heart, but the reality was more complicated. What was once a passionate marriage now seemed like a heavy routine. Quick "I miss you" messages became mere formalities, and Friday dinners became occasions marked by awkward silences. James, for his part, knew something was wrong but couldn't find a way to fix it. For him, working hard was the way to guarantee a future for both of them, and he never imagined that this same dedication could become a barrier between them. It was autumn, and on this particular night the air was cold and dry. Amanda was driving home after dinner with colleagues, and as she drove, she thought about how her life had changed so much in just a few years. She remembered the days when she ran home eager to tell James something new, but now, as she approached the entrance, she just sighed, already waiting for the silence that awaited her on the other side of the door. When he entered, he found James in the office, his expression serious, focused on his documents. She stopped at the entrance, watching him for a moment. "He didn't even notice your presence," his eyes fixed on a computer screen that reflected a pale glow on his face. Amanda felt a tightness in her chest and turned to go to her room, as she did every night. Over the past few months, there has been a subtle change in the way Amanda behaves. James noticed that she was more distant, more reserved. She always seemed distracted, and the smiles she used to give easily were now becoming increasingly rare. He couldn't deny that he felt guilty. He knew he was working too much, that he had neglected his wife in the name of goals that, deep down, didn't make sense without her. But every time he thought about approaching her, the words died in his throat. He feared what he might discover if he started asking the hard questions. Maybe it would be easier to believe that it was just a phase, something that would resolve over time. But time passed, and the discomfort only grew. Amanda, in turn, found social events a kind of refuge. There, she could be the vibrant Amanda, full of life, without the shadows of a failed marriage to dampen her energy. It was a freedom she didn't know she missed until she started experiencing it. There was a new sparkle in his eyes when he went on these dates, something James noticed but couldn't quite decipher. For him, it was like watching a slow, subtle change happening right before his eyes, but he didn't know how to stop. James began to feel a mix of fear and frustration. He wanted to fight for his marriage, but he didn't know how. It was as if there was an invisible wall between him and Amanda, a wall he didn't know when it began to rise. Every attempt at conversation seemed forced, and he felt like a stranger in his own house. Still, he hoped. I hoped that maybe, somehow, things would go back to the way they were. He wanted to believe that it was just a phase, that the love they had would be enough to overcome anything. But the truth is that, while he waited, Amanda moved further away. And so, they went on with their lives. She looking for a spark of happiness elsewhere, he trying to find meaning in endless nights of work. Each lost in their own thoughts, unaware that the silence that settled between them was, in fact, the prelude to a storm that was about to explode. That night, as James closed another file and Amanda got ready for bed, neither of them knew that the peaceful days were coming to an end. Because when the truth finally came to light, nothing would be the same as before, and the certainties that sustained their lives would be shattered in an instant. The weeks turned into months, and the distance between James and Amanda only grew. He, increasingly involved in office cases, and she, increasingly absent, finding excuses to spend less time at home. Outings for mate meetings became more frequent, and James couldn't help but notice how different Amanda looked when she was preparing for these occasions. There was a lightness in her step and a sparkle in her eyes that he hadn't seen in a long time. She smiled more, even if it wasn't at him. James tried to convince himself that it was just a phase. Maybe Amanda was just needing more space, an opportunity to relax and reconnect with other people. He repeated to himself that it was his fault for straying so far. But at the same time, there was something that didn't fit, a growing uneasiness that he couldn't shake. Little details began to emerge, a different perfume she wore, a muffled laugh on the phone, messages that were quickly deleted before he could see them. James began to wonder if there was something he wasn't noticing, but he suppressed those thoughts. I didn't want to be that kind of husband, suspicious and paranoid. Until, on a cold Friday night, he was alone in the office finishing yet another complicated case, when a notification appeared on his cell phone. A message from a mutual friend, nothing more than a blurry photo taken from a distance, but enough to make James' heart stop for a moment. The image showed Amanda, sitting in a fancy restaurant, accompanied by a man he didn't know. They were laughing, holding hands on the table, and the expression on Amanda's face was one of happiness he hadn't seen in a long time. It was an expression that belonged to them, or at least should have. James didn't know how to react. He could feel the adrenaline pumping through his veins, his hands shaking as he held his cell phone. A mixture of anger, confusion and despair took over him. He could confront her right then, demand an explanation, or he could wait and find out what was really going on. But a voice inside him, perhaps the part that still had hope, told him to be calm, not to act hastily. He forced himself to take a deep breath and spent the rest of the night working, or at least pretending he could. In the days that followed, James began to pay more attention. He watched Amanda with a different gaze, attentive to any change in her behavior. And every night she went out, saying she was going to meet colleagues, he felt the pain intensify. So, one of those nights, he made a decision. If she was hiding something from him, he needed to know. He needed to confirm it with his own eyes before doing anything. He hired a private detective, something he never thought he would do, but the alternative, living in doubt, was unbearable. The following weeks were silent torment. James received constant updates, photos of Amanda with the same man, going in and out of places he had never heard of. The detective was efficient, but each new photo, each new report, was a blow that pushed him into an abyss of sadness and frustration. She lied to him. But worse than the lie, was the way she managed to pretend everything was fine, smiling at him in the morning, like nothing was wrong, like their world was still intact. One night, as James leafed through yet another report left by the detective, he felt he could take it no longer. The evidence was there, in the photos and messages that the detective had collected. Amanda had a lover. A younger man, someone who had clearly found a hole in her life that James could no longer fill. James held the report tightly, his hands clenching the edges of the paper as he tried to process the reality unfolding before him. Every detail, every smile captured in the photos, felt like a stab in the chest. And he knew he couldn't ignore it. That night, he waited for Amanda to come home. When she entered, the light expression on her face soon turned into a worried look when she saw James sitting in the room, staring at her. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. Amanda hesitated, perhaps realizing for the first time how serious the situation was. She tried to smile, but the smile quickly died. "About what, James?" he asked, although the answer was clear in his eyes. "I know," he replied, standing up and handing her the envelope with the photos and reports. The shock on Amanda's face was visible, and she couldn't hide the tremor in her hands as she opened the envelope. Her expression fell as she flipped through the evidence, the reality of the betrayal finally revealing itself in a way that could no longer be ignored or justified. For a moment, silence took over the room, as if the entire world had stopped to watch that moment of destruction. Amanda tried to speak, to say something, but the words wouldn't come. She knew there wasn't enough of an excuse to explain what she did, and the weight of James' gaze crushed her. "Why?" he asked, voice cracking with pain. "Why did you lie to me, to us? What did I do wrong?" But Amanda had no answers, only tears that silently ran down her face, as if each drop was a silent confession. James closed his eyes, trying to contain his emotions. He waited for an explanation, a justification that might at least make sense, but there was nothing. Nothing Amanda said at that moment could erase the images that were burned into his mind, the moments she shared with another man while he was stuck in meetings and piles of files. And he knew that the next step needed to be calculated, precise, so that the truth she tried so hard to hide was exposed to the world in the same way she exposed their love to betrayal. James spent a sleepless night after the confrontation with Amanda. Even after she, with silent tears, tried to explain the reasons for her betrayal, he couldn't hear anything else. The words seemed to echo far away, as if she were speaking from inside a tunnel, and all that was left for him was the weight of disappointment crushing his chest. It wasn't just anger, it wasn't just the pain of knowing he had been betrayed. It was the feeling that everything he had fought for, the entire life they had built together, was a lie. When Amanda finally stopped trying to justify the unjustifiable, he stood up, looked into her eyes one last time, and left. That night, as he drove aimlessly through the deserted streets, something inside James broke. He could have confronted Amanda directly, he could have demanded answers, but he knew that would get him nowhere. The betrayal had already been revealed, and any excuse she tried to make would sound like an empty excuse. He knew what he needed to do, which was why, the next day, he returned to the law office, not to work, but to prepare his next move. His action needed to be calculated, precise and surgical, as a good lawyer would know how to do. Amanda woke up that morning with an all-consuming feeling of emptiness. James didn't come home, and she knew he would never be the same. She tried calling him several times, but each call was ignored. That silence was even more unbearable than the accusations and screams she feared. Deep down, she knew she deserved it, but there was something else that terrified her. What could James do now that he knew everything? Amanda was convinced that the damage had already been done, that the worst was over. But what she didn't know was that the real impact was yet to come. As she tried to focus on her morning routine, her phone buzzed with a flood of notifications. She looked at the screen and saw dozens of messages, missed calls, and then opened one of the messages her friend had sent. "Amanda, what is this? Please tell me it's not true." Without understanding, she quickly opened the social media app and, with just one look, her world fell apart. There, on James's page, was a post. A photo of the divorce envelope, with short, to-the-point text, "To room 1402. To my wife and her companion." The message was accompanied by a caption that read, "There's nothing worse than loving someone and finding out that love was wasted. To everyone asking where I am, know that I'm putting an end to a lie." The post spread like wildfire. People commented, shared, and soon Amanda's name was on everyone's lips. She felt her blood run cold in her veins. She knew James was hurt, but she never imagined he would be able to expose his life like this. She tried to breathe, tried not to panic, but with each new message that arrived, dread consumed her. Connections started coming from everywhere: friends, family, co-workers. Everyone wanted to know what had happened. Everyone wanted answers that she didn't have. Upon realizing what James had done, Amanda grabbed her keys and left the house, driving towards his office. She needed to understand why he had decided to act this way. When she arrived, she walked in without even knocking and found him sitting at the table, looking calmer than she could have ever imagined. James looked up and, for the first time since finding out everything, smiled. But that smile didn't bring any joy. It was an empty, soulless smile. "So you saw it," he said, his voice calm, almost cold. "Now everyone knows, Amanda. Everyone knows who you really are." She tried to get closer, tears welling in her eyes, her voice shaking as she said, "James, please, it didn't have to be like this. I know I messed up, I know I hurt you, but we can work this out. I was lost. It was a mistake, but it doesn't define everything we experienced together." "A mistake," he repeated, leaning forward. "A mistake is forgetting a birthday, Amanda. Cheating on someone for months, lying to me over and over again, that's not a mistake. That's a choice." He slammed his hand on the table, making it shudder. "You chose this. And now you will deal with the consequences." Amanda felt despair growing inside her. "I love you, James. I never wanted to hurt you. I don't know what made me do this, but I love you." The words sounded empty even to her, as if she were holding on to a frayed rope that could no longer support her. James stood up, slowly approaching her, his gaze piercing. "Do you love it?" he asked. "If that's what you call love, then I'd rather never be loved by anyone again. Because, Amanda, you don't just cheat once. You've done it countless times, and it wasn't just me you lied to. You lied to everyone around us, pretending to be this perfect woman. And now, everyone can see what you really are." Amanda felt the blow of those words like a knife. She could no longer hold his gaze, tears flowing freely. "I know you're angry, but exposing this to everyone? Why? I won't recover from this, James. And neither will you. It will only destroy us." James took a step back, laughing bitterly. "Destroy us? No, Amanda. It will destroy you. I'm already destroyed. I lost what I loved most, and nothing will change that. But I needed the world to know. I needed everyone to know who you are." He returned to his desk and picked up a folder, tossing it towards her. "And if you think what I did was cruel, then you don't know the half of it." Amanda opened the folder, and what she found there made her recoil, her eyes wide with terror. There were more photos, more messages, screenshots of conversations between her and her lover, and other evidence that the detective had collected. But what really caught his attention was a copy of an email. An email she had sent to her lover, where they discussed the possibility of her embezzling money from a joint account she maintained with James, so that she could start a new life, away from him, without him noticing. She read the email, the blood draining from her face, her breathing becoming heavy. "James, this isn't what it seems." "Oh, no," he said, his voice rising. "So you weren't planning to run away and leave me with nothing? Wasn't this a scheme to destroy my life while you started yours happily with another man? What is it, then, Amanda? Tell me. Because, from my point of view, from the look of it, it looks exactly like what you were doing." Amanda fell to her knees, desperate, trying to find words that could reverse this. "I wasn't going to do that, I swear. I was just confused. I thought about leaving, but I didn't. I wouldn't have the courage." "Courage?" James spat, approaching her. "You had enough courage to lie, to betray, to plan to destroy me behind my back. And now, you don't have the courage to deal with the consequences. And if you think this exposure was cruel, wait until I take these documents to court. I will make sure you can't take anything from me, not even the dignity you lost when you decided to betray me." The room fell silent, only Amanda's sobs filling the heavy air. James watched her, a mix of pity and contempt in his eyes, as he slowly walked away, leaving her there, alone, on the floor, surrounded by the evidence of her own despair. Amanda remained on the office floor for long minutes after James left, her body shaking as she tried to process everything that had just happened. The tears were flowing, but now they weren't just of guilt or regret, they were of fear. Fear of what would come next, of what James could do with the evidence he had in his hands. She always thought she could control the situation, that her lie, no matter how big it was, would never escape her control. But at that moment, everything had fallen apart. She never imagined that James, who had always been calm and rational, would be capable of acting with such coldness and determination. Somehow, she managed to get up and leave the office. As he got into the car, he realized that his hands were still shaking and that his mind was spinning with all the possible scenarios of what could happen. She was at a breaking point, torn between trying to save what was left of her life and dealing with James' fury. As she drove, a feeling of despair came over her, as if she were in free fall, not knowing where or when she would stop. James, on the other hand, had left the office determined to make every word he had said count. He knew the public exposure had been a cruel blow, but it was just the beginning. The entire ride home, his mind was racing with what to do next. He was tired of being the understanding man, the husband who forgave other people's faults. This time, he wanted Amanda to face all the consequences of her choices. But there was a part of him that, despite everything, still fought against it. It was as if, for a brief moment, the image of the woman he loved and with whom he had built a life tried to emerge and plead for mercy. Anger suffocated that part, but it was still there, latent and insistent. That night, he returned to the apartment that now seemed empty, even though it was filled with the same furniture, the same memories. He looked around and, for the first time, felt the weight of everything he was about to lose. The idea that the love he felt could turn into hate was unbearable. But at the same time, he couldn't erase from his mind the images of Amanda and her lover, the plans she made behind his back. It was as if two opposing forces were fighting within him, one wanting revenge, the other wanting to forget and move on. But the choice didn't seem to be his alone. What Amanda had done forced him to act. The next morning, Amanda received an email from James. She expected anything from an attempt at reconciliation to a simple request to never contact her again. But the content was much more straightforward, a clear list of terms for the divorce, including a promise that all evidence would be taken to court if she tried to fight any of his demands. He would leave her with as little as possible, and that was just the beginning. If she refused to sign, the exposure of the evidence would be just the first step in a long public battle, where all the details of her betrayal and her plans would be revealed. Amanda felt suffocated by the brutality of that message. Every word felt like a blow. But it wasn't just about what was written, it was the realization that James had complete control of the situation. For years, she prided herself on being someone who could handle anything, who had control over her choices. Now, she was completely at his mercy. His fingers tightened on his cell phone as he read and reread the email, trying to find some loophole, some detail that could turn the situation in his favor. But there was nothing. James had thought of everything. Still, Amanda couldn't accept the fact that her life would be reduced to such a humiliating defeat. All day long, she fought the conflicting emotions within her. Part of her wanted to beg James to have mercy, to remember the good times, the love they had shared. Another part knew this was impossible, that James had crossed a point of no return. She was about to lose everything, and, in a way, she already had. Meanwhile, James was also battling his own demons. No matter how determined he was to pursue his revenge, there was something that deeply disturbed him. He knew that by exposing Amanda like that, he wasn't just destroying her reputation, he was destroying himself in the process. It was as if the need to expose the truth forced him to strip away everything he was, to transform into someone he didn't recognize. But he saw no other way out. The pain was so great that it seemed impossible to get rid of it without everyone feeling the same. Later that same night, Amanda made the decision to confront him one last time. She knew that pride had prevented any previous attempts at reconciliation, but she had nothing left to lose. She needed to find a way to make him listen to her, to find some form of redemption, no matter how small. When he arrived at the apartment, he found James sitting on the couch, staring into space, as if he were trapped in his own thoughts. He barely looked up when she entered, but the silence that followed was so heavy it felt like shouting. "James, I know you hate me now, and maybe you always will," Amanda began, her voice cracking at first. "But I need you to know that none of this was meant to be this way. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I didn't want to destroy you. It was never about that." James finally looked up, his eyes tired and stern. "It wasn't about that. Amanda, you planned to steal from me, lied to me, and then tried to keep up appearances as if nothing had happened. How can you say it wasn't about destroying me?" "Because I was scared," she replied, her voice now firm, almost desperate. "Afraid that you would never understand that I needed something more, an outlet. I thought I could handle this without hurting you, but I was wrong. I know I was wrong." James watched her, and for the first time he saw something he hadn't noticed before, the raw vulnerability in her eyes. It was as if, for a brief moment, the Amanda he loved was there again, desperately trying to make herself heard. But was it too late? He didn't know. "Do you want redemption, Amanda? Do you want me to just forget all this?" he said, his voice low, full of pain. "Because I can't. I can't erase what I saw, what I felt." Amanda tried to get closer, her hand reaching out to touch his, but he backed away. "I don't want you to delete it," she said, the tears flowing again. "I just want you to understand that I still love you, in a crooked and wrong way, but I do. And I know nothing I say will change what I've done, but please, James, just listen to me." James sighed, as if the entire weight of the world was on his shoulders. He stood up, crossed the room and looked out at the night that seemed eternal. "I heard everything I needed to hear, Amanda. And I know that in the end, it's my choice what to do with it." She was silent, waiting, but he didn't say anything else. And in that moment, she realized that there might never be an answer that could change what she had destroyed. She hoped James' silence was the calm before a new storm, but what would come next, she could not predict. James was sitting at the court table, waiting for the judge to hand down the final divorce ruling. The silence in the room was almost deafening, and everything seemed to slow down, as if the entire world was waiting for that moment of closure. He didn't look at Amanda, and she didn't try to meet his eyes anymore either. It seemed that the last few months had drained any hope of reconciliation or even understanding. All that was left was the cold resolution of a bond that had once been warm and full of promise. James' lawyer had been clear and incisive throughout the process. He used all the evidence James provided, from the photos of the betrayal to the emails where Amanda plotted to embezzle the money. It was a solid, unrelenting case. The judge, after reviewing all the documents, did not hesitate to award the majority of the assets to James, and a minimal amount to Amanda, making it clear that the attempted fraud had been a decisive factor in the sentence. James managed to keep his dignity and assets intact, but at what cost? As the judge read the terms, Amanda remained motionless, absorbing each word like a direct blow. The world she knew, the life she built with James, was officially falling apart. She had nothing left but her tears and the crushing weight of her own choices. When she was finally allowed to leave, she felt an emptiness she had never experienced before, an abyss that seemed impossible to fill. James walked past her without saying anything, and that silence was the greatest punishment. Upon leaving the courtroom, Amanda realized that everything had changed. The public scandal that James triggered had irreversibly tarnished his reputation. There were no more friends to comfort her, co-workers to distract her, or opportunities to escape. She was alone, without the life she knew, and without the love that, in a way, she was still trying to save. As she walked the streets, each unfamiliar face seemed like a silent judgment, and she knew she would have to start over from scratch, carrying with her the weight of all her lies. But James didn't emerge from this story unscathed. Over the weeks after the divorce, he realized that revenge, however satisfying it might seem at first, had a price. He isolated himself, avoided social gatherings and immersed himself even more in work. Close friends tried to offer support, but there was a weariness and bitterness in James' eyes that no one knew how to heal. He had managed to expose Amanda, humiliate her, and make sure she paid for everything, but deep down, he wondered if that was what he really wanted. Because now that it was all over, he felt as empty as she did. One afternoon, weeks after everything was completed, James found himself alone in a cafe, the same one he and Amanda used to go to on Friday nights. Sitting at a secluded table, he watched the movement around him, life taking its course. He took a sip of coffee and realized that no matter how much he had won in court, he had not won in life. The love he once believed to be unbeatable was in ruins, and he didn't know how to rebuild what betrayal had destroyed. While James tried to find a new purpose, Amanda was faced with a brutal reality. Without a job and without a home, he had to return to the city where he grew up, to his parents' house, something he had never planned. She spent weeks in a state of apathy, trying to understand how she had gotten to that point. The pain of seeing James move on without her was constant, a reminder of everything she had lost by her own actions. But, little by little, Amanda began to realize that she needed to move on, somehow. She found work in a small store, something far removed from her previous career, but one that helped her keep her mind occupied. And, little by little, she began to accept that the future she imagined with James would never exist again. She would need to create something new, something that, even small, could give her a reason to continue. It was a slow, painful path, but for once, Amanda wasn't lying to herself. She understood that the consequences of her actions were irreversible, and that now she would have to live with it. James, on the other hand, also found a way to move forward. He decided he needed a change, something that would take him away from the memories that still haunted him. He started making plans to expand his office to a new city, something he always wanted but had put aside because of Amanda. Moving away meant a fresh start, and he needed it more than ever. Before leaving, he decided to visit the cafe one last time, as a farewell ritual, a way to close that chapter of his life. As he sat down, he realized that this was the last time he would allow the past to dictate his future. When the waitress came to take his order, he realized that, for the first time in months, he felt at peace. Maybe it wasn't complete peace, but it was a start, a step towards something he could rebuild, even if alone. And so, James and Amanda's story came to an end. She lost everything she had tried to manipulate and ended up rediscovering her own vulnerability, something she had buried long ago. And he, as much as he had achieved his revenge, realized that the true victory was not in destroying the other, but in finding a way to move forward, leaving the past behind. And so this story ends, a raw portrait of how betrayal can destroy lives, crumble loves and leave scars that not even time can completely heal. But also, a reminder that every choice has consequences, and that true power is not in manipulating others, but in finding one's own truth, no matter how painful it may be. Did you like the story? So leave your comment and share your opinion. We want to know what you thought of this outcome. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more impactful and exciting stories. And remember, here, we do not support any type of betrayal. The stories are fictional, but the consequences are very real.